The wind whispered through the maple trees lining Willow Creek estates, rustling leaves like tiny whispers of secrets no one dared speak aloud. In the quiet suburban cul-de-sac, rows of identical houses sat in perfect symmetry, their manicured lawns polished to the kind of precision only obsessive homeowners associations could demand. On the surface, it was an idyllic neighborhood, the kind where kids rode bikes safely down the streets and neighbors waved politely during morning walks. But behind the pristine facades and white picket fences, tension simmered like a hidden current beneath glassy water. I learned that tension firsthand the night Karen Whitman knocked on my door. She didn't knock lightly, the kind of polite tap that suggested small talk or a friendly hello. No, she rapped with a purpose, each strike sharp, deliberate, like a hammer cracking wood in a silent room. I hesitated, sensing that this wouldn't be just another neighborhood run-in. My name is Mark Dawson, and I never thought a simple refusal to share a digital code could escalate into a full-blown legal nightmare. Karen was the HOA president, or, as I had come to realize, the self-appointed enforcer of every unspoken rule. She had a reputation that stretched far beyond Willow Creek estates. Parents whispered about her over garden fences, mail carriers exchanged knowing looks, and even the local law enforcement tread lightly when her name came up. That night, I didn't know that a single door code, a string of numbers I guarded as fiercely as my own privacy, would become the fulcrum for a battle I never imagined. It began innocuously enough, a crisp Monday evening, the kind where the air carries a faint chill and the sun dips behind rooftops in streaks of burnt orange. I was in the kitchen, unpacking groceries, when my smart doorbell pinged. I barely glanced at it, assuming it was some sales pitch or a neighbor with an overly cheerful tone. But when I saw her face, Karen Whitman's carefully applied frown, eyes narrowing like a hawk, my heart sank. "Mark Dawson," she said, voice clipped and authoritative. "I need your door code." I froze. My hand lingered over the bag of apples, wondering if I had misheard her. "Excuse me?" I asked, my tone cautious. "My security records show that your unit has unauthorized visitors. I need access to your apartment, now. The HOA requires it." I laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke or a misunderstanding. "Karen, you can't just ask for my door code. That's private." Her frown deepened. "It's protocol. Non-compliance can result in fees. You know that." It was the first time I truly felt the weight of living in Willow Creek Estates. Subtle rules turned into rigid chains, and Karen seemed determined to wield them with surgical precision. She handed me a notice, thick and official-looking, stamped with HOA insignia. It listed a non-compliance fee that would activate if I refused. My stomach dropped. The number was absurd, over $600 for declining to hand over a string of digits that unlocked my home. "Mark," she said, leaning in slightly, "this isn't optional. You're making things harder than they need to be." I could feel the tension radiating off her, the type of woman who thrived on control. "Karen, I'm not giving you my code. I don't care what your HOA rules say. That's my security. That's private." Her lips pressed into a tight line. I knew then that she wasn't used to hearing no. The look in her eyes was both incredulous and furious, like a predator discovering its prey had claws. She walked back to her car, but the message was clear. She wouldn't stop here. The following week, I found notices in my mailbox with the same fee written on official HOA stationery, each one more menacing than the last. Karen had escalated, sending emails, texts, even showing up at my door unannounced. She seemed to relish the confrontation. Her every action calibrated to unsettle me. I confided in my neighbor, Lisa Monroe, a bright and pragmatic woman who had lived in Willow Creek Estates for over 15 years. Over coffee on her sunlit porch, I recounted the ordeal. "Mark," she said, stirring her tea thoughtfully, "Karen Whitman thrives on fear. She's done this before. People pay to avoid headaches even when they shouldn't. But you're already fighting this by standing your ground." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. It was comforting to have an ally. Yet every word Karen spoke seemed to echo in my mind like a warning. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about a door code. This was about power, and I was about to be tested in ways I hadn't anticipated. Then, one evening, everything changed. I arrived home to find my mailbox torn open, letters strewn across the sidewalk. Among them was a new notice, this one legally worded threatening immediate action in small claims court if I did not comply. It read like a declaration of war. My blood ran cold. That night, I sat in my living room staring at the untouched coffee on the table, the city lights outside casting eerie shadows across my walls. I knew that Karen Whitman wasn't just another HOA president. She was a force, and I had just crossed her path. But I also knew something else. I wouldn't back down. The next morning, I hired a lawyer, Jessica Reynolds, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney with a reputation for taking on powerful neighborhood entities and winning. She listened to my story, eyebrows arching in disbelief as I recounted the threats, the fees, and the relentless harassment. "Mark," she said, leaning back in her leather chair, "you've got a strong case. HOA can't just demand access to your home. This is harassment. And those fees? They're not enforceable if we challenge them. But we need to prepare for a fight. Karen Whitman doesn't play fair." I felt a flicker of hope amidst the growing storm. The battle lines were drawn. Karen's next move would determine the trajectory of our conflict. And I had to be ready. By the time the weekend arrived, tension hung in the air like static before a thunderstorm. I saw Karen walking past my house, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning my property with that same sharp, calculating gaze. Her presence was unnerving, but it strengthened my resolve. I wasn't going to let her intimidate me. That night, I double-checked my locks, ensured my cameras were functioning, and sat back with a sigh. The battle with Karen Whitman had officially begun, and neither of us would back down without a fight. Little did I know, this confrontation would not only test my patience and resolve, but also expose secrets and truths hidden beneath the perfect surface of Willow Creek Estates, a story that would culminate in a courtroom, showdown where justice, dignity, and integrity would all hang in the balance. The days that followed were a blur of whispered phone calls, legal jargon, and mounting dread. Karen Whitman didn't just stop at letters or passive intimidation. She began a campaign of relentless surveillance. I started noticing her in the most impossible places, across the street, pretending to jog or standing just inside the corner of a neighbor's driveway, clipboard in hand, eyes flicking toward my house as though memorizing every detail. It was disorienting. The sense of calm I had clung to in Willow Creek Estates felt like a fragile illusion, shattered by every calculated step Karen took. I found myself double-checking locks not just on doors, but on windows, gates, even the garage. My smart security system became an extension of my nerves. I spent nights scrolling through footage, tracking her movements, heart pounding with each passing shadow. Jessica Reynolds, my attorney, was the only voice of clarity. During one late afternoon strategy session in her office, she spread the files across her oak desk like a battlefield map. "Mark, here's the thing," she said, tapping a stack of documents. "Karen's playing psychological games. She knows intimidation works better than law for most people. But legally, we're in a strong position. There's no precedent allowing an HOA president to demand private access to someone's home without consent. No matter how official she looks." I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. "I know, Jessica, I didn't realize how aggressive she could be. It's exhausting." She fixed me with a sharp look. "That's the point. She's banking on exhaustion. She wants you to pay the fee or relent out of frustration. Don't let her win that way. We'll take her to court if we have to, and believe me, it'll get messy. But that's where we'll have the upper hand." Her words were comforting, yet the anxiety lingered. Willow Creek Estates, with its pristine lawns and symmetrical houses, suddenly felt like a cage. Every interaction became a potential minefield. Mail carriers gave sympathetic nods when I collected my letters. Neighbors whispered about Karen with a mixture of fear and amusement. It was as if everyone knew the game, but no one dared intervene. Then came the first overt act of retaliation. One morning, I found a thick envelope slid under my door. Inside was a statement from the HOA, meticulously itemizing a late compliance fee, with charges for each day I had refused Karen's demands. The total had ballooned to nearly $1,000. Attached were screenshots of text messages where she had written, "We will not tolerate defiance. Pay immediately or face consequences." I felt a rush of anger, followed by icy fear. Her audacity was staggering. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was weaponizing them. I contacted Jessica immediately. "She's gone too far." "Look at this," I said, showing her the envelope. Jessica skimmed it, then pursed her lips. "Mark, this is exactly what I expected. She's trying to intimidate you into paying, but this is actually good for us. Every threat, every illegitimate fee becomes evidence in court. Document everything. Don't respond directly to her outside of legal channels. Let's set a trap." And so we began the documentation process. Every interaction with Karen, every letter, every text, every odd appearance near my property was logged, photographed, and time-stamped. It felt obsessive, but I realized obsession was now the price of security. I was preparing for war. The neighborhood began to feel like a chessboard. Every morning I would notice Karen watching from the corner of her driveway, as if calculating my next move. One afternoon, I caught her speaking to one of the board members, gesturing toward my house. The sense of being watched, analyzed, and judged was suffocating. I confided in Lisa Monroe again. "They can't do this forever, Mark," she said firmly, leaning on the railing of her porch. "You just have to weather the storm and hit back in the right way. That's why you hired Jessica." Weeks turned into a tense rhythm of escalating harassment and legal preparation. Karen Whitman had become a shadow, her presence looming over me even when she wasn't physically there. The HOA continued sending letters threatening fines, inspections, and punitive measures, all with the same undercurrent: comply or else. Finally, the summons arrived. The small claims court date was set. I stared at the envelope. The inked letters spelling out the beginning of a showdown I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The courthouse loomed in the distance like a cathedral of judgment. Its stone facade indifferent to personal grudges but imposing nonetheless. On the morning of the court date, I arrived early, my stomach a knot of nerves and anticipation. Jessica was by my side, calm and composed. "Remember, Mark, this is about facts and legality. Don't let her theatrics get under your skin," I nodded, trying to steady myself. The waiting room was a mixture of mundane legal proceedings and undercurrents of drama. When Karen arrived, it was with the same posture I had come to recognize: rigid, controlled, calculating. Her eyes met mine briefly, and I saw a flicker of recognition, perhaps annoyance that her intimidation hadn't worked. The courtroom itself was deceptively simple: a judge's bench, a small audience, the walls lined with the quiet hum of anticipation. Karen's attorney presented the HOA's claims with a practiced tone, emphasizing non-compliance and fees, painting me as a defiant resident disregarding community rules. But Jessica was meticulous. She countered every argument, highlighting the illegitimacy of demanding private access, the lack of authority to enforce punitive fines, and Karen's pattern of harassment. Evidence was presented: emails, photos, security footage, timestamps of letters, even witness statements from neighbors who had observed Karen's obsessive monitoring. I watched as the scales of tension tipped. Karen's calm exterior began to falter under the weight of documented proof. Her expressions, sharp, precise, and confident, started to betray cracks. A raised eyebrow, a slight frown, the tight press of her lips. The same woman who had so relentlessly pursued me now faced the cold impartiality of the law. By the end of the hearing, the judge had seen enough. The ruling was clear. The HOA had no legal grounds to demand access, no enforceable right to impose the fee, and the harassment exhibited was unacceptable. Karen Whitman's authority had been effectively challenged, and my refusal to give the door code was upheld as my right. The gavel struck, echoing through the courtroom like a signal of finality. Relief surged through me, overwhelming months of anxiety and fear. I felt a release, a weight lifted that I hadn't realized had pressed down on me for weeks. Outside the courthouse, Lisa was waiting, smiling with unrestrained joy. "You did it, Mark. You stood your ground. She didn't see it coming, did she?" I shook my head, smiling despite exhaustion. "No, she didn't." For the first time in weeks, Willow Creek Estates felt like home again, not a stage for surveillance and intimidation. The streets were the same, the lawns meticulously maintained, but the invisible tension had dissipated. The lesson lingered. Standing up for what's right, even against relentless forces, could lead to justice. Yet I knew one thing for certain: Karen Whitman wouldn't disappear quietly. But now, I had the law, the truth, and my own resolve on my side. The storm had passed, but the memory of its intensity would remain, a reminder that vigilance and courage are indispensable when facing intimidation. The morning sunlight cut through the courthouse windows in sharp, unforgiving lines, casting long shadows across the polished floors. I walked in alongside Jessica Reynolds, my heart pounding, though I forced it into a measured rhythm. Today wasn't just another procedural hearing. It was the culmination of months of tension, intimidation, and sleepless nights. Karen Whitman, the self-proclaimed queen of Willow Creek Estates, had summoned her full arsenal, and I was about to meet her head-on in the legal arena. The courtroom buzzed faintly with muted conversations. Residents who had once whispered behind hedges now sat quietly on the benches, curious or perhaps wary. I recognized a few neighbors from across the street, their eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and relief. They had witnessed the siege I endured. Karen entered shortly after, impeccably dressed, a steel blue blazer pressed to perfection. Her eyes scanned the room, stopping briefly on me with the same steely glare that had haunted my evenings. But today there was something different, an edge of impatience, a hint of uncertainty. She had built her reputation on fear and control, and this time her weapons were being dismantled piece by piece. The judge, a calm man with a reputation for fairness, called the court to order. "We're here regarding the dispute between Mark Dawson and the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association," he began, voice steady, resonant. "Mr. Dawson, you may proceed." Jessica stood beside me, a pillar of confidence. She didn't rush or hesitate, letting the weight of evidence speak. She presented the stack of documentation we had compiled. Every letter demanding my door code, every email threatening fines, screenshots of text messages, even witness statements from neighbors detailing Karen's persistent monitoring and harassment. "Your Honor," Jessica said, her voice precise, "what we have here is a clear pattern of harassment under the guise of authority. The HOA president has no legal right to demand private access to a resident's home, nor to impose punitive fees for exercising a fundamental right to privacy." Karen's attorney interjected, attempting to frame the story as compliance enforcement. "Your Honor, the HOA acts to maintain security and order in the community. The fees were issued as a last resort due to non-compliance, a documented violation of the community rules." Jessica didn't flinch. She pulled out another document, this one a transcript of Karen's own messages. "Documented violation? Your Honor, these messages reveal intent to intimidate and coerce, not enforce legitimate rules. The alleged fees were nothing more than a tool of harassment." For the first time, Karen's composure faltered. Her lips pressed tightly together, jaw clenched, eyes flicking nervously to her attorney as if expecting rescue. But the facts, cold and undeniable, were against her. The neighborhood had watched, the law had been invoked, and the evidence was overwhelming. "Mark Dawson," the judge said, turning to me, "is there anything you wish to add?" I took a deep breath, steadying the nerves that had coiled in my chest for months. "Yes, Your Honor. This isn't just about a door code. It's about privacy, about boundaries, about the fact that no one, no matter their title, has the right to intimidate, threaten, or manipulate someone in their own home. We all live in this community, but that doesn't mean we surrender our fundamental rights. Today is about upholding those rights." The courtroom was silent. Karen's glare had sharpened into fury, her hands gripping the edges of her chair as though she could physically impose control. But the law is indifferent to rage, and the evidence was incontrovertible. After a brief recess, the judge returned, the gavel in hand. After reviewing all evidence and hearing the arguments, it is clear that the HOA overstepped its authority. Mr. Dawson's refusal to provide his door code was within his rights. Furthermore, the fees issued by the HOA are deemed unenforceable and are hereby voided. A wave of relief washed over me. Months of stress, anxiety, and tension suddenly lifted, leaving a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Karen's shoulders stiffened, and she looked as though the ground had shifted beneath her. The gavel struck again, and the sound reverberated like a declaration of finality, not just in the courtroom, but in the narrative of my life in Willow Creek Estates. But there was more. The judge continued. Additionally, the court recognizes the pattern of harassment and intimidation demonstrated by the HOA president. While this ruling resolves the financial dispute, the court strongly recommends that the HOA review its policies and the conduct of its officers to prevent further abuse of authority. Karen's face was a study in disbelief. She had wielded fear as a weapon for months, only to be confronted by a combination of law, evidence, and resilience. The power she had assumed over neighbors, over residents, over the very notion of order in Willow Creek Estates, had been exposed as nothing more than calculated aggression. After the proceedings, outside the courthouse, neighbors approached me. Lisa Monroe, ever the voice of support, enveloped me in a hug. "You did it, Mark. You didn't let her bully you. You held your ground." I nodded, the weight of months of stress slowly lifting. It wasn't easy, but I had to. I couldn't just let her win. As I walked home, the neighborhood looked different. The houses were the same, the lawns pristine, the streets quiet, but the invisible tension that Karen had cultivated was gone. People waved as I passed. Children rode bikes down the street without hesitation. Willow Creek Estates felt like home again, a place where boundaries were respected and privacy honored. That evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset streak across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I realized that the ordeal had changed me. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was a lesson in resilience, courage, and the importance of standing up for oneself, no matter the odds. Months later, I learned that Karen Whitman had been reprimanded formally by the HOA board, her authority curtailed. The fines she had attempted to levy against residents were abolished, and new policies were enacted to prevent the misuse of power in the community. Justice had been served, and a precedent had been set. Intimidation, no matter how sophisticated, could be challenged and defeated. As I closed the door that night, secure in the knowledge that my home was truly my sanctuary, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The storm had passed, and though the memories lingered, they were tempered by triumph. Willow Creek Estates remained beautiful, orderly, and peaceful, but more importantly, it had become a place where residents knew they could stand up for themselves without fear. And in that moment, I understood something vital. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the resolve to act despite it. Karen Whitman had underestimated that, and that mistake had cost her everything. For the first time in months, I slept soundly knowing that I had reclaimed not just my home, but my peace, my dignity, and my rights. The gavel had struck, and the echo would last long after the courtroom emptied. Justice, in its slow and deliberate way, had prevailed.